One of my coaching clients, when I met him, he had $325 million of assets under management, already doing pretty darn well. But he was stuck a little bit. With referrals, he was taught the old way. I get paid in 2 ways or 3 ways. Once we could flip that switch in his brain and he realized he could make it about the other people, bringing the value to others, being on that mission to bring the value to others, man, that made all the difference in the world. And he's recently gone over $1 billion under management.
Welcome to today's episode of the Active Advisor Podcast. I'm Rebecca Muse-Orlinoff, Head of Marketing here at Harbor, and I'm excited to host this conversation. Today, we're joined by Bill Cates, an expert in client acquisition and referral marketing for financial advisors. Bill is the author of The Language of Referrals, among many other books, and has helped thousands of advisory practices increase their revenue by mastering the art of turning happy clients into powerful referral sources without feeling pushy or awkward. You'll hear why unsolicited referrals may not be as beneficial to your business as it might seem, some specific words and phrases to begin incorporating into your vocabulary, and how to avoid becoming that cheesy referral guy or gal. Bill's going to share his strategies for turning satisfied clients into your best prospecting tool. Here's our interview with Bill Cates. So Bill, I was thinking about our conversation today, and I was thinking about how when we moved into our new house a few years ago, we had this wonderful painter. He and his team did such a great job on some of the rooms that we wanted to get a fresh coat of paint for. And when he was done, he asked if I would mind introducing him to any friends who may have recently moved or were looking to do a renovation project in their home. It didn't even cross my mind that that would be uncomfortable or awkward. I was so happy to do it. It was such a job well done. And I immediately set up some conversations for him with people that I knew might be in the market. So I guess I'm just thinking about the advisory business and wondering if you think it's harder in financial services or financial advisory practices to ask for an introduction maybe than in other industries, just based on what you've seen.
Doesn't have to be harder. The perception is it's harder. That's pretty much why I've been in business for 30-odd years. But there's no question that clients become a little less comfortable providing those types of referrals and introductions. It's much easier to refer a painter because you're not talking about personal financial matters. Even though everything is confidential, people just, they get a little more pride around that. At least a lot of people do. So yeah, your success rate might be a little lower in financial services than as a painter, but the principles are all the same.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to hearing a little bit more about principles, strategies, tactics, frameworks from you, because I know you've worked with advisors for a long time to help them develop and then flex this muscle on asking for introductions.
Yep.
But before we get into that, something that I was thinking about is just generally client acquisition and marketing for advisors overall. And I'm wondering if in your conversations and from the advisors that you know well, if you would say that marketing in general has become a bigger focus for advisors over the last, let's call it 5, 7, 10 years, or is it just that there's new and different tactics all the time? So maybe we see marketing activity in different ways than we would have a decade ago.
First thing I want to do in answer to that is draw a distinction between prospecting and marketing. Most advisors, not all, but most advisors at some point in their career get taught how to prospect. And I would say that being proactive for referrals is a form of prospecting. It's a pretty high level form. Nonetheless, it's something we're reaching out. I hate to use the word push, but it's kind of an outward effort, if you will. Marketing, on the other hand, in general, is more of an attraction type situation where when we market, we try to get our message resonating with the right people so it attracts people to us. Prospecting never goes away. It's always a part. I'd say if we put it under the banner of client acquisition, not much has changed in the sense that there's a need for that. When someone's a little more successful, they've been at it for a while, then that changes because they're starting to look for a specific type of person usually. Usually the quantity dynamic goes down a little bit and the quality dynamic goes up. The more successful, the longer they've been in this. But if you think about just referrals, for instance, because I know that's a big part of what we're going to talk about. Before there was a telephone, internet, telegraph, before any of that, right? Any kind of electronic communication. If someone wanted to do business in another town, another village, they would have a letter of introduction with them that they would present to someone else. And that letter of introduction contained the borrowed trust that allowed the door to be open to them. Now, that's what referrals introductions still do. It's leveraging borrowed trust between the referral source and the prospect. And of course, we then have to earn our own trust to keep it going, to get the door fully open and get inside. So that dynamic has not changed one iota. One thing that two things that have changed. One is obviously the fact that it's just harder to reach people these days. People don't pick up their phone if they don't know who's calling. I mean, when I first got started in this business, I made a lot of cold calls and I could reach people because they pick up their phone. But now it's tough, right? So one of the things that's changed is the emphasis on introductions, not just referrals or word of mouth or referred leads or whatever term you put to it, but actual connections, introductions, very important. And that's once the do not call regulations came out and other things that's what made that happen. Of course, the internet has changed things in some respects. There's a big push, obviously, to digitize prospecting and marketing. I think in some cases, it's people just hiding behind the digitization because they don't want to pick up the phone and call, or they don't want to go out and network and meet new people. I'm not saying everybody does that, but that's a piece of it, I think. So I like the blend of both. I like the blend of the digital and the human side of things. That's why I teach what I call relationship marketing. So we emphasize the relationship. And sometimes I use the word tradigital. It's like the tradigital, hard for me to say, right? The traditional things that we do, and then you add in a mix of the digital, and that creates the most dynamic. Yeah, technology plays a role, but Michael Kitces did a study, does this study every year or so, and the 3 most profitable marketing strategies of all the advisors he studied: referrals from clients, referrals from centers of influence, and networking in the community, going out and about and doing stuff in the community. Those are the 3 biggest return on investment of time and dollars to bring clients into a practice. Building a business based on how people want to meet you.
I wanted to ask you actually on that note, what you see advisors doing specifically with LinkedIn.
Yeah, a lot of cold calling with LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a new cold calling for a lot of advisors, just spraying generic messages out to people. I often joke when I'm doing a speech or a presentation in front of a group, I often say the people making the most money on LinkedIn right now are the people trying to sell you a course on how to make money on LinkedIn. Now, it's a little tongue in cheek, but there's some truth to it. There are some people that are producing some results using LinkedIn. And every example I've ever seen of any advisor having some results in prospecting marketing with LinkedIn is when they have a target market. They have a very clearly well-defined, specific target market. And the reason why LinkedIn works better is because their messaging is better. The narrower their focus, the clearer they are on who they're trying to reach and what that person's challenges are and fears and aspirations and all that, and their benefits package with their company or how their business works and their cash flow. The more you know about them, the more tailored your messaging, the more likely they're actually going to pay attention to something that you say to them or content that you put out there.
Well, it sounds like whether it's through human connection or digital connection, one of the through lines in your coaching is get specific. Get specific with your value, the types of people that will benefit from your value. We talk about this a lot within the context of marketing, a concept from Seth Godin, who's a best-selling author and thinker about modern marketing. And his phrase for this concept is finding your minimum viable audience. And it gets to this point of if you're creating for everybody, you're creating for nobody. But the secret is if you can really define your MVA, your minimum viable audience, 2 things happen. Number 1, it's a bigger audience than you may think it is. And number 2, the people in it will tell one another about you because you serve their specific needs. So that it sounds like it's very in line with the way you would coach an advisor to define their offer.
Absolutely, because you bring more value to those people because you know them better. And they know people like themselves and they see that you're trying to work with people. The The narrower you get, generally speaking, I mean, within limits, and it depends a little bit where you live geographically, et cetera, and whether you want a national practice versus your local practice. But the principle at hand is generally the narrower, the better.
So what is it that typically stops someone from asking for an introduction?
Yeah, usually a mistaken belief or mistaken thinking. Look, advisors don't look needy, cheesy, sleazy, unsuccessful. That's one thing that stops. They don't want to feel and look and be perceived as pushy. They don't want to put people on the spot. They don't want to get rejected. They don't want to hear no. I don't want to give you a referral. So it's the mental side. In my book, The Language of Referrals, I call it the inner language. It's the mindset. And a lot of people think that asking referrals, introductions is risky. And that's clearly a limiting belief in my book because I teach a way to do it that isn't risky. And so what advisors need to do is to understand what are the limiting beliefs? What is stopping them? I respect the fears and the doubts and the things that stop people because we all have those things, right? That stop us from doing stuff. But they don't necessarily have to be there. It's just the story we tell ourselves. And there actually is another way to look at it. So one of the things, in all the work I've been doing is to help people see the beliefs. So for instance, if people think it's going to put someone on the spot, it's going to hurt the relationship. Well, if you do it right, it won't. And one of the things that helps with that is the promoting and the planting seeds or the encouraging the possibility of introductions. You do that early in the relationship, you see how they react to it. And then later, when you come with a regular request, it's not out of the blue. You've already kind of played in that sandbox a little bit around that. So it really is, it's the mindset. We all know it. Most people know it. And we just got to learn a new story to tell ourselves.
I think any advisor would say that referrals or introductions can come from very intentional actions, but they can also come your way unsolicited. And I would imagine that for many advisors, it sounds like the dream to build a business entirely on unsolicited introductions and referrals and network expansion, where you didn't have to ask for anything or put your client in a potentially uncomfortable situation. I guess the question for you is, do you see a downside to relying exclusively or overly relying on unsolicited introductions or referrals?
I get a lot of folks I talk to, advisors, they do get stuck in that either not getting the right kind, or they often get a wrong type of prospect sent to them by a client, and they feel a sense of obligation to serve that person because a client introduced them. They don't want to hurt that relationship with a client. And I would say, unless the part of the household or a close family member, parents, children, grandchildren, maybe siblings, tight part of the household relationship, then if you take on someone just because they were introduced to you by a client, you're going to create a loose situation. And so you shouldn't take those on.
Any examples come to mind of stories where someone took on too many of the wrong fit? What can happen?
Well, yeah, actually, yeah. It was an advisor in Virginia. She was taking on kind of anybody that came her way. And it's kind of an old habit when you first get started in this business. They fog a mirror, meaning they're breathing. You'll talk to them. And then she got to the point, and she believed in great service. And she got to the point where she had a lot of clients of different strata, different types of business she was doing with them, with different amounts of income and investment and assets under management, et cetera. And she was trying to give them all the equal amount of high-level service. And so her practice was extremely unprofitable because she had too many employees trying to deliver all this high-level service to folks who really didn't really need it. Now, they came to expect it because she delivered it. She got them into that habit of expectation. But over time, she started to segment better and not take on folks that didn't match. She brought in a junior advisor, and that person took some of the legacy clients. So she was able to adjust. But yeah, you can find yourself at that point where you can't serve everybody in the way they probably should be served.
Makes a ton of sense. It's like if you are building a business that is for anyone, you're kind of building a business for no one.
In a sense. I mean, you're still helping those folks, but I get the point. Especially with your messaging. When you build messaging that's kind of designed to attract everyone, then it's certainly hard to stand out, and you'll just get whatever you get. And one of the biggest mistakes I found that many small business owners make, financial advisors within that is they think, well, I don't want to leave these folks out and I don't want to leave so they cast too big a net and for fear of missing opportunity. And what happens is their messaging gets watered down. Their messaging becomes less relevant to the people they really do want to attract. So the key here, one of the keys, is just get super duper clear on who it is who is a right fit client for you. What are the demographics? What are the psychographics? What does that person look like? Build out a persona or 2 or 3 types of personas of those people. And then everything you do, when you figure out who you're trying to reach and who you serve the best and who you like to work with, then everything else kind of falls in place. The messaging falls in place. The strategies and tactics fall into place once you know the who.
We'll come back to some specific personas and demographics in a little bit. But before we do that, I want to get into some of the frameworks or the principles that you've outlined and written about in your book, The Language of Referrals. Before that, let's talk about the name that you chose for the book. You could have called it The Power of Referrals. You could have called it The Art of Referrals, Referral Academy. There's infinite number of names you could have used for the book, but you chose the word language. Why is that?
This book was intentionally extremely practical and tactical. I used to have what I call a scripts book. It was a book of possible conversations, word tracks that one might follow. And here's what I've discovered. Sometimes there's a strategy that is inaccessible to people. So for instance, asking for introductions, that's a strategy, asking. But a lot of advisors, for reasons we can get into if you want to, don't do that. And so it's inaccessible strategy to them. When I give them a few word tracks or scripts, I'm expecting anyone to memorize the scripts unless they really want to, but it gets them started and they're finding the right words for them. Then all of a sudden that strategy opens up to them. They go, oh, I never thought about saying it that way or approaching it that way. And so when they see, usually you don't want to start with tactics, you want to start with strategy and then build the tactics underneath it. But there's a case to understand how a strategy might play out so you can visualize it and feel it and see it. And then that strategy becomes accessible. So that's one of the reasons why I called it the language of referrals, because people like being fed the possible language. One other point I'd love to make is you're hearing me use the word referrals and introductions kind of interchangeably. And old habits die hard. And let me tell you where all this is coming from. First of all, I think because it's so hard to reach people, we really, when we're talking to clients and prospects and centers of influence, we really should be using the word introductions because that's the word that represents what we want, is the getting the connection to that new person. So that's an important distinction. So some principles there and some strategies I thought people might find very helpful, I hope.
Well, let's jump into one of those principles and frameworks. What is the VIPS method, VIPS?
So it's essentially, first of all, to remember this, think of the referrals, the introductions, the new clients as the VIPs of your business, right? The VIPS. So V stands for value discussion. And without question, of all the things I've been teaching for over 30 years to advisors, this is the most important. And it's a checking in. It's an open-ended checking in to make sure that prospects and clients are indeed recognizing the value. It's not a value telling. It's not a setup. The old methodologies, people used to teach what they called the affirmative. And they'd say, have you found this meeting to be helpful? Yeah, great. Who do you know? No, too assumptive. I don't believe in that. It's a discussion. It's a back and forth. Bottom line is we want to make sure expectations are being met. We want to make sure that the communication, that the value is being perceived. Open-ended type questions. That's the V. That alone will make a difference for you if you just start doing that. The I is treat the request with importance. All right. Why do we want to treat it with importance? First of all, because the work you do is important. I certainly hope you believe that. And so therefore it deserves to be treated with importance. Paying the work you do forward to others, who's next to get this important work, that does deserve to be treated with importance. And also how you put things out, how you kind of express it to people will make a big difference on how they receive it and give it back to you. If you're kind of weak, wishy-washy around this, well, you probably won't get a very good response. The P is permission to brainstorm or explore. 2 steps. The first is the buy-in, the permission. I found that instead of being assumptive around this and assuming someone's willing to have this conversation, we want to soften it a little bit. When we soften it, we actually get more engagement in the conversation. So we want to get buy-in. And then when I say brainstorm, explore, we want to create an environment where there's no right or wrong answer. There's no pressure. It's a brainstorming, right? We're just throwing a few thought ideas out. That's an ideal kind of energy that we want to put to this if we can. And so that's what the P stands for. And then finally, the S is suggest names and categories, meaning come as specific as possible. So here's a principle, and if it may feel counterintuitive to a lot of folks. The narrower your request for possible introductions, usually the more effective you will be, usually the better. The mistake that everybody has made, everyone listening, and myself, we've all made this. Can you think of anyone else who should know about the work we do? Or can you think of anyone else we might be able to help? Any kind of generic, throw it open to the whole universe type of question. And most people know that fizzles. I mean, lightning strikes occasionally, and sometimes they'll think of someone, but most of the time it just doesn't, it just dies, right? So the bullseye is specific people they know, people you've learned who are in their life through doing the good work you do and learning more about your clients and gaining context. You just naturally learn about other folks in their life. And that's a great place to start. And another part of the bullseye are the traditional money in motion, life event categories. Those are as powerful now as they were 30 years ago because, gosh, if you look at your book of business and your clients, just about every advisor I've ever talked to, they would acknowledge somewhere in the 70, 80, 85% range of those new clients had something going on in their life that got the advisor on their radar into their life. Could be money, emotion, life events. And so those are great categories. The worst thing that happens when using the VIPS method is that you plant the seed. You promote the opportunity for later. And I suspect most people listening to this have had a situation where they maybe asked the client for an introduction to someone or maybe a little more generic request for referrals. Client didn't think of anyone, didn't go anywhere. And then 2 months, 2 years later, that client says, hey, I think I have somebody for you, right? And they're happy about it. And they love to make that introduction, but more on their terms. So the worst thing that happens by asking is you promote the possibility for the future.
Yeah. Is there a best time in the relationship with your client to make the ask or plant the seed, as you mentioned before, for an introduction?
Yeah, so I'll make a distinction between those two of asking and planting the seed. So here's something to keep a lookout for is what I call value recognizing statements that prospects and clients make. We're becoming referable. We're moving in that direction when value is delivered and value is recognized. So of the two, which is most important? Well, they're both pretty important, but I'd say the value recognized is a little more important when it comes to referrals and introductions, right? Because they got to know that they're seeing the value. You may know you're giving them great value, but if they're not perceiving it or feeling it or seeing it, then that really doesn't help in terms of the next step. So pay attention to these value recognizing statements. Pay attention to when people say thank you and give you a hug and all the various things that people do that acknowledge your good and important work. And that's a great place to plant the seed, to promote, to encourage. So someone says, hey, this is great. I love where we're headed with this work. Thank you. I'm glad you're seeing the value. And I believe this work is important. Please don't keep it a secret out there. Right? Don't keep me a secret. Don't keep the work we do a secret. Share the experience is another kind of way of saying don't keep me a secret. Share the experience. Never too busy to see if I can be a resource for other people you care about. I've already mentioned. So just pay attention to those value recognizing statements.
You just mentioned some of them, but are there other important words or turns of phrase that you find to be particularly helpful for advisors to just tuck into their back pocket as they encounter these moments, which may come up without warning?
Yeah, so I've given you 3. I'll give you one more. There's about 11 in the book, Language of Referrals. So one is don't keep me a secret. Another is share the experience. Another is never too busy to see if I can be a resource for other people you care about or other your colleagues or family members, however you want to structure that sentence. But I'll tell you, there's a lot of folks advisors I've worked with over the years. I mean, I've been teaching this don't keep me a secret thing forever. I didn't invent the phrase. I was just doing a book signing recently for a group, and one of the advisors came up to get my book and said, yeah, I used don't keep me a secret yesterday. I got 2 referrals from it. And I go, great, appreciate the validation. And so one of the gentlemen that I interviewed for my podcast, Johannes Harrison, has used my stuff for years. And he says to his clients, he says, you're not keeping me a secret, are you? And so that's just another way to play with that. I know that phrase doesn't fit everybody. Some people think it's a little too cute. That's fine. We have others, but that's the culture building, right? Of acknowledging and teaching and letting your clients know that you are indeed open to see if you can serve others.
One more question about language here. And then I just want to wrap up with a couple different real life scenarios or personas that maybe you could walk us through a little bit more tailored advice. We all hope that a request for an introduction goes really well, whether it is followed up immediately or whether it's more of a seed planting outcome. But what is it that advisors should be listening for or looking for in a situation where there's initial reluctance to make that introduction? What's a common scenario there? And how does an advisor distinguish between this is not the right time yet versus this is not worth pursuing with this particular client?
So I have a little formula I'll teach you real quick. And a lot of it will depend on the tone of voice and the energy behind that reluctance, right? In other words, if someone says, oh, you want a referral? No, I don't give referrals. I'm private. No, I don't do this. Well, there you're probably going to back off pretty quickly. Depending on the relationship, you could check it out. You could say, well, first of all, the last thing I want to do is anything that you don't want to do. But I'm curious, you've had a bad experience, what happened, right? So the formula is to acknowledge and understand and learn and to ask questions. So even if someone's pretty vehement about it, you can still probe a little just to find out what happened without any effort to try to make them want to do anything they don't want to do. You certainly don't want to do that anyway. And so that's the first two steps of the formula: acknowledge and explore, acknowledge and learn and understand. Now, from there, I use kind of the rule of two. In your exploration, you learn, well, they're just concerned about confidentiality, and you clear that up. Then you might move forward. Or they're concerned that they don't want to just give you names and phone numbers and you call their friends. No, that wasn't your intention anyway, so you clear that up. They're concerned that if they introduce you to others, you won't have enough time for them. Well, you can clear that up. So those are some of the things you can reframe when you explore and learn a little bit behind their reluctance. But if they repeat the concern, if they give you a new one, if their body language, tone of voice changes, and you just get the sense they just soon not do this right now, that's when you back off. That's when it's time. So it's kind of the rule of two. You get two pieces of resistance, you back off. And you back off planting the seed. You don't back off with your tail between your legs. You back off by saying, oh, that's fine. Rebecca, I just want you to know that I'm never too busy to see if I can be a resource for others you care about when the time is right. Makes sense? Yeah, it makes sense. Or if you're kind of upbeat, but you're not ready to do it now, I can say, yeah, that's fine. Just all I ask is when you identify someone you think should at least be aware of what I do, might benefit from the kinds of conversations we've been having, just don't keep me a secret. Fair enough? And they'll go, yeah, fair enough. So we don't want to fear that reluctance, resistance that does happen from time to time. Once we know how to handle it, then we won't fear it, and we know how to back off with grace and professionalism.
Wondering if there's any differentiation in the guidance you would offer for an advisor based on where they are in their career. So, for example, is there anything more specific you'd tell an advisor who's on the earlier side in the client acquisition phase versus someone who's more established? Is there more specific tailored advice for a newer advisor?
Yeah, a couple of things. So that phrase I mentioned earlier, never too busy to see if I can be a resource, where those to see are kind of the qualifying words. If you're newer in this business and you just need practice talking to folks and need to pay your rent, you can take the to see out. You can be a little less qualifying in how you talk about it. Never too busy to be a resource, never too busy to talk to. So that's one thing. A lot of folks that are newer in the business mistakenly think that what I teach is only for someone who already has an existing book of business, that they have people to go back to. And while that's nice, nothing could be further from the truth. You can use these strategies and tactics from the very beginning. In fact, when you're newer in this business, you might be just a little bit more proactive than you'll be down the road, because it's important. It's important that you reach people and do your good work for folks and stay in business so you can keep helping them. So part of this is for you to stay in business so you can keep helping the people you've already brought in. Those are the big differences. Later in your career, you'll qualify more. Earlier in your career, you qualify less, generally speaking, unless you're working for a firm where there's specific minimums of income or assets or something like that, in which case you just got to follow that. But it can work. The same thing, by the way, with centers of influence. with accountants, attorneys, other folks like that who can sometimes send folks our way. Principle, you got to be referable. They've got to understand what you do. They got to feel good about it. They got to trust you. And it takes time for those folks to trust. So it's not an instant kind of relationship. It takes time to build that. You got to talk about what the connection looks like, the introduction. So all the principles, everything we've talked about around client referrals and introductions hold true also for centers of influence. Tactically, it changes a little, but the principles are definitely the same.
What about somebody who, for example, has recently gone independent? Maybe they were within a wirehouse and they've hung their own shingle and established their own RIA. Do the principles change or do they remain intact?
Principles change, but the circumstance, it can create a great opportunity because you can go back to your clients that you've, first of all, if you're going to take some of those clients with you, hopefully, and most advisors don't bring as many as they think they're going to, and some of them don't handle the transition well, but nonetheless, you do want to let these people know why you're moving and what's in it for them, right? What's in it if you're moving from, let's say, wirehouse to independent? What's in it for your clients for that, right? That's all they really care about. And so, but that does sometimes create opportunities to talk a little bit about introductions. Certainly, it creates the opportunity to talk more about the value that they're receiving and that they're going to receive, and they'll see the difference, and they do, and then you can check in with them later. But the principles in terms of becoming referable and asking, really not much different. Really, whatever kind of business model you're in, the principles are pretty much all the same. If you're an RIA, you have a little less compliance looking over your shoulder, so maybe you have a little more freedom, but everything's pretty much the same.
All right. I think where I want to end is with this. What is one thing that any advisor, wherever they sit, however long they've been in business, wherever they are in their career and whatever kind of firm they work for, what is one thing that advisor can do today to put themselves in a better position to grow through introductions and find their next client through a referral?
Can I give you two?
Yes.
So I already covered one, which is the value discussion. That checking in, making sure people are seeing the value, open-ended conversation. I guarantee, I stake my reputation on, if the folks listening to this start doing this today with their prospects and clients, they will see a difference. They will see a difference on how people talk about the value. You'll get a few unsolicited referrals from doing it over time. It's huge. The other thing is to be on a mission to bring your value to others. There's a lot of talk about the why you do what you do and why you believe in your value. And I think that's very important. The why can be a little bit about you and a little bit academic or kind of interesting. But when it becomes a mission that you're trying to bring this important work, let me give you an example. One of my coaching clients, when I met him, he had $325 million of assets under management, already doing pretty darn well. But he was stuck a little bit. With referrals, he was taught the old way. I get paid in 2 ways or 3 ways. Once we could flip that switch in his brain and he realized he could make it about the other people, bringing the value to others, being on that mission to bring the value to others, man, that made all the difference in the world. And he's recently gone over $1 billion under management. So, and in his style, it's very simple. He's very direct. He's a very straightforward kind of guy. And he attracts those people that like that. And he'll do his value discussion. And they'll say, great, I'm glad we got a happy client. I'm glad to see the value and all that we bring to the table. And I'm just wondering who's next, right? Who's next to experience this value? And so when you're on a mission to bring that value to others in a very caring, client-centric way, believing in your value, you will do better with this because it's all got to come from that. When it comes from that, you do better with this.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives, your wisdom, your experience with us today. Where can advisors find more from Bill Cates?
Well, I appreciate the question. Obviously, referralcoach.com is my website, referralcoach.com. It's a good start. I have a podcast. It's free wherever podcasts are found, called Top Advisor Podcast, Bill Cates' Top Advisor Podcast. Then you can just access a lot of the great interviews I've done, just like you guys have great interviews on your podcast. And if you're interested in the book, The Language of Referrals, just go to languageofreferrals.com, and you can check out the book. And I'm very accessible. Love to take your questions and help you out any way I can.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
You bet. Thank you.
And now for important disclosures. This material is for informational purposes and is not intended to be relied upon as a forecast, research, or investment advice, and is not a recommendation, offer, or solicitation to buy or sell any securities or adopt any investment strategy. The opinions expressed are as of 23rd of October 2024 and are subject to change. The opinions expressed by the speakers do not necessarily represent the views of Harbour Capital Advisors Inc. The information and opinions contained in this material are derived from proprietary and non-proprietary sources deemed by Harbour Capital Advisors Inc. to be reliable and are not necessarily all-inclusive and are not guaranteed as to accuracy. This material may contain forward-looking information that is not purely historical in nature. Such information may include, among other things, projections and forecasts. There is no guarantee that any of these views will come to pass. This material may not be representative of the experience of other individuals. Reliance upon information in this material is at the sole discretion of the viewer. This material is not legal, tax, or accounting advice. Please consult with a qualified professional for this type of advice. Investing involves risk, including the risk of loss. Stock markets are volatile, and equity values can decline significantly in response to adverse issuer, political, regulatory, market, and economic conditions. Fixed income investments are affected by interest rate changes and the creditworthiness of issuers. As interest rates rise, the values of fixed income securities are likely to decrease. Specific companies and issuers are mentioned for educational purposes only and should not be deemed a recommendation to buy or sell any securities. Any companies mentioned do not necessarily represent current or future holdings of any investment products. Harbour Capital Advisors Inc. does and may seek to do business with companies covered in this podcast. As a result, listeners should be aware that the firm may have a conflict of interest that could affect the objectivity of this podcast. This material is prepared by Harbour Capital Advisors Inc. Harbour Capital Advisors Inc. is not affiliated with Referral Coach International. All trademarks or product names mentioned herein are the property of their respective owners. Copyright 2024, Harbour Capital Advisors Inc. All rights reserved.